What's up, guys? Doug Polk here, and welcome back to another episode of Poker Hands. And today we got a double header for you. We're going to be looking at two of the biggest hands that I played this week on Poker After Dark.
Temperatures were there, they might have been like 6% international. Like now they're probably like 15 to 20%.
Yeah.
And then they want a lot of first generation college, which is great. But then it's sort of like, you know, the smart kid that went to a private school, if they aren't capable of giving, you know, a building to Stanford, you know, then they've got to be really exceptional.
Yeah.
Raise to 6,500.
Yeah, which, I mean, you know, you can make a pretty good argument about that not being fair to that kid.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So, you know, I actually think, you know, at Stanford, I mean, there should be limits, but it is also a private institution as opposed to, you know, say like UC Berkeley. So I feel like maybe there should be a slightly different set of rules.
Well, you know who,
one is directly getting taxpayer dollars, like large amounts, and
right,
but the other one, you know, isn't.
Oh boy.
But, although, I mean, in some way, all universities right now are basically the benefit of a lot of easy
How much
money
more do you have
coming in
behind?
through like granted loans and all that. That's
Yeah.
part of the reason why tuition costs are like so ridiculous at a lot of places. A lot of places that don't justify it.
right.
Like, I mean, you could say, okay, Stanford or like the Ivy League schools, you know, regardless of the quality of education, which is
60.
probably the best, you're also like actually getting like a very meaningful stamp
Like I need a loan?
of approval in your diploma and
100%.
getting a job. But like some places, it's like
17.
the education is probably worse. Although let's even forget about
We got flags in there.
Oh
now.
yeah, we got flags.
But yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, you know what I'm about to
Yeah.
say. Yeah. We got multiple white chips going in the pot.
Yeah, we need to play a game where it says the rules cranberries.
Our hand begins five-handed in the hybrid format from Poker After Dark, and Brandon Stevens decides to open it up in the hijack with pocket kings. I'm going to go ahead and say pretty safely a standard open. Now in the cutoff, I look down at pocket aces, and I like to re-raise them to 6,500. Again, pretty standard. If I was out of position, I might like to go a little bit bigger, but in position, we use a smaller size because it's much worse for our opponent to call. When they're in position, they have more ability to make money post-flop, but here that is not the case. Anyway, the action folds back around to Brandon, and with pocket kings, you primarily want to be re-raising. In fact, I would say you almost always want to be re-raising. The answer is obvious. I could have plenty of worse hands, you know, value bets like ace-king or queens or jacks, or even have you bluffs like ace-5 suited, or maybe queen-jack suited, or anything kind of like that as well. So he decides to go ahead and 4-bet, and he picks a pretty big size. He goes 17.7 thousand here, you know, a little less than 3x the size of my 4-bet. On these stacks, I think I like going maybe a bit smaller. He only has around 60,000 behind. I think I'd prefer to see something more along the lines of 15 or 16,000, but again, small difference, and he might want to try and deny equity if I do have a hand like ace-5 suited or queen-jack suited or any of those lighter hands. Now this is where we get my first real decision point in the hand with pocket aces. Should I go all in or should I call? And the answer here is not always so clear. I think in general you should probably lean a bit more towards going all in and try and stack your opponent. One of the things about aces is that because you have two aces in your hand, you block your opponent from having some kind of bluff hand like ace-queen or ace-jack, and while you also do block some hands like ace-king, I think overall you block a little bit more of the hands that he'd want to bluff with rather than the hands he has for value. He's much more likely to have kings, queens, or jacks with pocket aces, so in general you should try and stack your opponent. But you might be saying, Doug, I saw you call here and you're saying we should go all in. And that's right. I think the answer to this question is you should mainly go all in, but you always want to work in a little bit of calling. By calling with pocket aces, I give myself a chance to stack him on some boards I might not otherwise if he was bluffing, and I also strengthen when I call a 4-bet. If I never slow play my aces pre-flop, then it's kind of obvious I'm a little bit weak post-flop when I do call. And the last thing that's important here is as the stacks become more shallow, the more you should look to try and trap. If we're 300k deep, I'm probably going to be putting the 5 bet out there, although then things get a bit different too. I might be more worried about what my hand looks like and call as well, but the point is it makes a lot more sense to try and re-raise and get value as the stacks get deeper. Here, the pot's going to be huge if I do decide to call. It's going to be almost 40,000 in the middle before we see a flop, and he's only got 60,000 behind, so I don't mind the trap. Should mix it into your play. I do call, and let's take a flop.
Oh boy.
Ooh, the king jack. All right.
Steven under the gun, raised with the kings. Polk 3-bet to 6,500. Steven made it 17 plus. Polk then decided to flat and has now been out-flopped by Brandon, who's got top set.
That's 21,700.
Check.
Meaty 21-7 on the flop.
Calling. Call.
As Polk moves all in and gets snap called.
Queens.
He's got the Broadway draw.
There you go.
Oh, wow.
He's still way live.
How many times, boys?
The flop comes king, queen, jack with 2 diamonds, and I'm obviously annoyed with the situation. Now, if my opponent had a hand like kings, queens, or jacks, they've moved into the lead, and also if they were bluffing with a hand like ace-10 suited or king, queen, well, now I'm just behind those hands when I was way ahead. So this is a pretty bad board. The only good news is that I do have a gut shot straight draw, which gives me more equity against the strong holdings, and I also have the ace of diamonds, which might not seem like a lot, but it does give me 4%-ish more equity against the strong hands that my opponents can have. Brandon decides to go ahead and bet 21,700, and now we have kind of an interesting spot here with aces. You know, I've thought about it a bit more now in retrospect, and I think I still like a jam. I really don't mind a call either, but fold is completely out of the question. And let me go ahead and show you guys some math to break down exactly why I think that. Okay, so we're going to get a little more complex than we normally get here on the show, but I want you guys to know exactly what I was thinking when I jammed on the flop. So I created a spreadsheet here of the different value of my jam, assuming different things about what my opponent is doing. Let's go ahead and look at the absolute worst case scenario. My opponent only has kings through jacks, and he's never bluffing, so he never will fold to a jam. He doesn't even have aces. Somehow he just doesn't have that hand. Either he would trap it pre-flop or check the flop. He never has ace-king. Again, somehow getting away from that one somehow. But he always has a set. The bet on the flop equals a set. Not saying that's true, but let's just go ahead and think about that example. In that scenario, my jam loses $22,000. Pretty bad, not a good situation, but also not the end of the world. We're talking about a $160,000 pot. I'm still going to have about $38,400 in the pot. So I will lose on average $22,000, but you know, and that is bad, but not absolute devastation. However, let's look at some other examples here too. What if he can have ace king? Well, now if he can have ace king in this spot, if he plays ace king like this, our EV is plus 17,000. So you have to really be able to rule ace king out to even begin to consider folding. Or what if he has, this aces and ace king? Or what if he doesn't have jacks? You know, I think on this stack size, a lot of players might not re-raise jacks. They might not be trying to play for all of their money. If you take jacks out of the equation, we're all the way up to $25,000. Now let's imagine he folds occasionally. He folds 20% of the time. Well, now our value is at minus 6K if his range is only jacks through aces, not even including ace king. So realistically, most scenarios, I think we end up being profitable here. If he legitimately never has anything but a set on the flop when he bets the flop, then yeah, we're losing by a bunch, but that's very unlikely. You know, at higher stakes, people bluff, they go after pots, and then he will also have hands like aces and ace king and have to make a decision. You know, he might not be thrilled with those hands in the flop. I don't think anyone is, but he will have a gutter as well as top pair or better. A lot of times you're just going to have to go with it. So if he can have aces and ace king, if he ever has a bluff, I mean, he could have a hand like ace-5 suited and be trying to take it down. If he can have any of those holdings, then yeah, he's going to end up bluffing sometimes and having to fold when I jam. If he does bluff, then it gets outrageously profitable for me to jam. Does he bluff 40%? I don't think so. Does he bluff 20%? Could be a reasonable number. I'm actually going to break this down more in depth in the Upswing Poker Lab Facebook group. If you guys are part of that, we'll do a little bit of a longer explanation. But let's go ahead and move on to what happens after I jam.
As Polk moves all in and gets snap called.
Queens.
He's got the Broadway draw.
There you go.
Oh, wow. Well, he's still way live.
How many times, boys?
Are we allowed to go more than once, or is it always once?
I think you're allowed to do whatever the hell you want. It's a cash game, right?
Well, I'm sure you guys could.
You want to go twice?
I don't care. I don't care at all.
Hey, it doesn't. I mean, whatever you want to do, I don't care. I'm not going to decide, so.
Biggest
times?
pot of the night.
Twice?
Layla?
Layla,
Yes.
twice.
Twice?
Okay. Only twice.
And Polk says, let's run it twice.
You get that pretty little diamond there. That's kind of a nice little removal card.
No ace, no 10 is all Brandon's thinking.
Good. That's Brandon.
Kings full on the first board as Brandon is guaranteed a chop. Now he's going for the scoop. Needs to fade 6 outs once for Doug. And he does.
All right, let me get an exact count here.
Yeah. Good job, Brandon.
Yeah, I played it like a rock star.
I want to let you guys know about a new thing I'm doing over on Instagram. Now, if you're familiar with my Instagram stories, I did a segment called Poker Tip of the Day for a long time, where I'd give people a daily tip on how to improve their game. The problem was, after a couple hundred tips, got a little bit difficult for me to keep making them up, so I have a new segment called Coach Doug. The way that it works is every day I check my Instagram inbox or Twitter or Facebook, any of my social medias, and I find a question that someone has about poker. It can be strategy, it can be mindset, it can be anything about the game of poker, and I'm going to answer one every day over on Instagram. So if you're interested in checking that out, you can do so at my Instagram, Doug Polk Poker. Send me your question and it might get chosen. Let's move on to the final hand of the night. This was the biggest pot played this week on the show. I was involved. Last hand, someone's getting stacked. Let's check it out.
So you're not just messing with me, you've had it.
Yeah, I've really had it a bunch, Brandon.
Against me.
Speaking of having it,
Flop set of queens against my eights.
I mean, that was like a nothing pot. You called and check folded the flop. I mean, you lost 3,000.
3,000 is a lot of money, man. What are you talking
No,
about?
it's not. Come on.
Three waves, 13,200.
three becomes 13-2 as Kuhn 3-bets. Doug could very reasonably either flat or 4-bet here. And it's looking like option B.
We raised 38,000.
Yeah, I mean, you beat kings another time. You flatted with ace jack. I mean,
Oh, that's right, yeah.
I don't know. Like a 9-10 suited, a jack-6 suited.
Yeah, that's right.
It's not. Didn't have the 4-8 offsuit.
No more raising.
Our hand begins at 600, 1,200 with a $1,200 ante in the big blind. It's a pretty big game, and the action folds me on the button, and I look down at my third favorite hand, pocket queens. I decided to open up to 3,000, and now the action's on Jason Kuhn, the small blind, who looks down at pocket aces, a pretty good hand to have when someone has, I don't know, kings or queens. Sometimes. Sometimes a good hand. Kuhn does decide to make it 13.2 thousand, and the action's back to me with pocket queens. Now, when you have hands like queens, you're going to have to accept your fate if someone has you beat. We're talking about a button versus small blind situation. This should be a pretty loose, aggressive spot. In fact, of anywhere you should 3-bet, this is probably the most aggressive you should be in the small blind, and the button's going to be one of the loosest places you want to come into the pot. So both players should have pretty wide ranges, and the small blind should be going after a lot of those button opens. I do decide to 4-bet, cutting out a raise here to the size of just about 35,000, 36,000, and the action's back over to Jason Kuhn. Actually, maybe it was 38,000. Now, if you're having flashbacks to the first hand that we covered today, You're right, because this is exactly the same spot that I faced aces against a 4-bet. This spot's a little bit different though. We're talking about small blind and button. There should be some looser ranges going on, but the stacks are also quite a bit deeper. We're something in the vicinity of 150-ish blinds deep to start this hand. Also worth noting, we're playing an ante game, so you should be playing a bit more aggressive than you would be in a 150 big blind game without the ante. Anyway, should he flat or should he 5-bet? Well, I'm glad you guys asked, because the answer, and I know you guys love this, is you should do a little bit of both. In general, in this spot, I think I do like flatting a bit more than the last spot. I think that there are more hands a button could be choosing to 4-bet bluff with, and I don't think that there are as many hands that are willing to stack off 150 blinds deep. Yes, you might lose some value from hands like kings or queens, but those aren't as likely as a host of other holdings. Now, you could 5-bet. I think it's fine to be doing that some of the time. If you guys like to trap someone because you think they're aggressive, that's cool. If you think you're playing a nit and you want to stack them, that's cool too. But in general, you should have both options in your arsenal. Anyway, Jakun does decide to make the call, and let's take a flop.
Kuhn not interested in a 5-bet. Flat calls, 9 high board with 2 diamonds. Polk does have the backdoor flush draw.
I had 4-8. Suited though.
Kuhn slips it to him.
I mean,
Here, that's a big pot.
I actually was doing that for Bob's 5. Yeah.
was that his Bob loves that hand?
It used to be his favorite hand, but now he says
Then he decided to try to win.
he upgraded
No,
to
no,
6.
no.
No,
He
I
can
think
play
now,
any 2 cards.
now I
and
think
win
it's
that,
like 3, 6.
he can play any 2
off.
cards and win that guy. Guys,
Kuhn, the only player at the table to have Doug Polk covered.
Continue.
He started with 190 and 184 respectively.
I mean, not everybody, but I mean, I do. Antonio's like one of my closest friends. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Doug's
pretty easy
continuation bet,
to hear what
23,000. Smaller than the pre-flop 4-bet.
No, but I've been amazed, like, because I usually never talk about stuff, and then I'll have people that aren't even part of like poker. You know,
Less than
how
1/3 of the pot.
where the fuck did you hear this from?
All in? Oh, wow.
Jason moves all in, and Doug snap calls.
Twice. Sure.
The flop comes 9-3 deuce with 2 diamonds, and Jakun's aces are still strongly in the lead. That seems fair. Seems fair to me. At this point, the pot is 78,000, and Jason checks it over to me, as he should with all of his hands. Well, now with queens, we've got a pretty clear bet, and this is actually the kind of flop you should be betting a lot as the button. I think there's a good argument to be made to bet almost all of your hands here. If you want to occasionally check with a hand like ace-king or ace-deuce suited, and also occasionally with a trap like aces with a diamond, I'm okay with that strategy. But this is a good board for you on the button. If your opponent has any of the suited Broadway hands that might call a 4-bet, they've bricked unless they have diamonds. So if you have a hand like aces, kings, or queens, you're almost always in the lead. Now, yes, you'll occasionally run into some traps, but Jason shouldn't be calling pre-flop with kings and queens very often. In general, with those hands, it's more important to jam pre-flop, deny equity, and win a large pot right there, rather than calling and allowing your opponent an opportunity to realize their equity. Now, ace is a bit of a different ball game. Ace is a much better hand to be calling with because there aren't that many bad flops for aces. Anyway, Jason does check to me, and now with my queens, I decided to bet pretty small. I go around 23,000 here on the flop. The reason I like the small size is because it puts a lot of hands in Jason's range in kind of an awkward spot. Let's say he has a hand like tens. Well, he could decide to go with it here on the flop, but then if I do have a hand like queens or kings or aces, I'm going to stack it. If he decides to check call and I'm bluffing, then he's going to get a lot of tough situations on later streets. What if I have a hand like ace-4 suited or ace-queen or something like that? Then I have a chance to hit huge for a massive pot, and he just allows me to get there with those bluffs. What if he calls and scary cards come? What will he do on a jack or queen or king? What will he do on an ace if he does have a hand like tens or jacks? These are some tough situations that can happen to you when you're out of position. So this small bet size puts him in a really difficult spot with a wide range of holdings. Aces, however, is not one of those holdings, but the spot is pretty interesting for Jason. He could decide to call and let me hang myself if I'm bluffing, or he can decide to raise, stack hands like kings, queens, or maybe jacks, as well as flush draws. So this is an interesting spot. You can do a bit of both. I think they're both fine. Again, I know you guys love to hear that, but I like his decision to go all in because in this spot, I think a better hand to trap with is a hand like aces with a diamond. When you have that hand, there are no draws. They're going to call you all in. And also your opponent has less equity against you. If diamonds do show up on the turn, you got the nut flush draw as some backup. So if you want to split it in some kind of way, going all in with aces without a diamond and calling with the ones with a diamond could be a fair and nice way to split it up. Once Jason does go all in and it's back to me, I'm not exactly thrilled with the situation, but the reality is he's rarely going to have hands like kings, and he's not going to really have hands like queens because I have queens. So this looks like, to me, occasionally aces, occasionally some kind of high flush draw, nut flush draw type holding, or maybe once in a while a hand like tens or jacks. I think if he had a hand like nines, I think he's a little more likely to call, but it could occasionally be a hand like nines as well. Wouldn't be fun, but also possible. The thing about jacks, when I said I don't think it's going to often be jacks, I mean, I think in general he's going to look to call the flop, but he could have it when he check raises all in. So when I look at this spot, I look at queens, there's really no way around it. You're going to have to call the jam. In general, when you bet in 4-bet pots and you get jammed on, you're usually going to have to just call it off, and if you're beat, you're beat. I'm going to have some hands here like ace-king, or ace-5, or ace-4 suited, sorry, ace-5 suited, ace-4 suited. Maybe even a hand like queen jack offsuit. I'm going to have plenty of bluffs. I'm going to have to bet and fold. I can't really be betting planning on folding to a jam. Also, I do have a diamond, which isn't a huge deal, but it gives me a bit more equity against my opponent's hand, which becomes kind of relevant here.
Twice it is.
And there is a cold, chilly frost on this deck.
Ooh.
Diamond on the turn on the first board as the players agree to run it twice.
Come on. Only a little just chop it up. Chop, chop. Okay. All right, I don't feel very good now. That was a lot of it.
Polk can't hit the running flush. Kuhn has half locked up. Can he scoop?
Is this the last pot?
Another diamond sweat for Doug.
Cruel world. Cruel world. Offsuit deuce burger incoming.
Right color, wrong suit on the end.
Well, this is gonna be maybe 75.
It's gonna be all of it, Doug.
So all in all, a super fun day of poker for me on Poker After Dark. But if you guys want to see more Poker After Dark, you can do so. I'm going to link in the description below. You can check it out. And also, if you're interested in learning more about the first hand, I'm talking about it on the Facebook Engage group for the Upswing Lab. You can check that out in the description below as well. Okay, that's going to do it for me. As always, guys, thanks for tuning in. Remember to subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys again soon.